episode 3 of Food for Your Mind. I'm Henry Ronan Daniel, and at last we've reached Anna Karenina and the Dave's Triple from Wendy's. This is the top of the heap, ladies and gentlemen. I guess let's go ahead and crack into this thing. God, look at that. This is shaping up. I don't want to prejudge anything. This is shaping up to be my least favorite thing that I've gotten from Wendy's so far. This is like a cube of beef here. All right, here we go. Oh, this is preposterous. If you think this is bad, there was a guy in front of me who was getting a Baconator with an extra patty, so a triple Baconator, and a chicken sandwich, and fries, and a drink, so it could always be worse. He was a rather larger gentleman. Person of size, I believe, is the preferred nomenclature. But see, here's the thing. Anna Karenina is more book than The Shining or The Corrections, which we read the first 2 episodes. But unlike the Wendy's Triple, which is just an additional third patty of the same thing, Anna Karenina is actually made of different stuff. Okay, so I ate about half of that. I think that's probably good enough. You know what? As I said, it was a cube of beef. Ratings are falling a bit for me as I increase the number of patties. My ratings continue to fall for Wendy's. I think I'm actually going to give this one a 3. So my lowest rating so far for any of the food. Anyway, let's move on to Anna Karenina. Anna Karenina was written by Count Leo Nikolaevich Tolstoy, Leo to his friends and family, who was born September 9th, 1828 in Yasny Polyana, deep in the heart of Mother Russia. Tolstoy led a very long and very interesting life. I'm going to focus, for the purposes of this talk today, on one single fact about Leo Tolstoy. In the middle of his life, during his middle age, he experienced what some people call an existential crisis, or a moral crisis. I guess the simplest way to explain what that is, if it's never happened to you, and if it never has happened to you, hope that it doesn't, is that he became very, very depressed and felt that essentially life wasn't worth living anymore. Rather than letting this destroy him, Tolstoy emerges from this as a committed Christian and a pacifist. The Russian intelligentsia during Tolstoy's day were all atheists. He had been an atheist up until that point. Excuse me. Half triple, still doing a number on me here. But his conversion was, by all accounts, very sincere. He gave away all of his money after that, or almost all of it. He started dressing in this very, kind of bizarre peasant outfit from the previous generation that stood very much in contrast to who Leo Tolstoy actually was. If you're interested in reading more about this aspect of Tolstoy's life, he wrote a fairly brief essay called A Confession regarding his fundamental commitment to pacifism. You can also check out a work called The Kingdom of God is Within You. As regards to Anna Karenina, what is important about this is that it is only after Tolstoy has this breakdown or revelation, or however you want to think about it, that he writes his best work, Anna Karenina. It's a very old question, do you have to suffer to be an artist? And I don't know if you're familiar with a program called The Beverly Hillbillies, but in one episode, Jethro decides to become an artist, and somebody tells him, you have to suffer to be an artist. And so he lays out in the sun, gets a sunburn and stuff like that. I suppose there is a bit more to it than that, but at least this much can be said, that Leo Tolstoy suffered a great deal to write this book, and we should all be grateful. It can become a joke in a certain way, but in general terms, I do believe that's true. We've discussed some of the other writers in materialist terms and talked about their own backgrounds, their own economic class, growing up and while they were writing, and how that affected their work and how they see the world. One of the ways in which Anna Karenina is different than the other 2 books we've read, and it transcends some of the class-based limitations of those other books, is, I think, that Tolstoy, despite the fact that he grew up very wealthy and was a member of the Russian nobility, in fact, at a certain point in his life, as I said, gave all that money away, or gave almost all that money away, and began to live a very different life than he had previously, and to care about things that he had not cared about previously. And in fact, I think that is one of the things that allowed Tolstoy to transcend his own background, to transcend his own aristocratic background. And that is also one of the reasons that Anna Karenina sort of resists the narrow, class-oriented reading of the sort that we gave The Shining or The Corrections, for example. The difference between this novel and the previous two may become something of a theme in this discussion. This version is, I think, 800 pages. Usually they're a little bit longer than that. There's a lot of words per page in this one. But rather than trying to explain Anna Karenina to you, or give you my personal theory about it, in this video, I'm basically just going to try and convince you to read it. Let's back up from Anna Karenina for a moment. Why read Tolstoy? If you've never succeeded in reading Tolstoy before, why should you? Why should you do it? First of all, there's Russia. Tolstoy's Russia is a pretty interesting place. I'd like to share a Rudyard Kipling quote with you. He said, "Russians are the easternmost Westerners and the westernmost Easterners." And it's a bit hard to break down what all that means, but I will say that having read this book and War and Peace and Crime and Punishment and Chekhov and some other Russian-type stuff, the thing that is so interesting about it is that it's just different enough to be fascinating, speaking as an American now. And yet at the same time, it's similar enough that you can actually understand it. I've tried to read some things that are far more remote than this, say, like Dream of the Red Chamber from China sticks out as an example. And man, I went through all 800 pages of that thing, and I tried my best to get a grip on what was going on, but I felt that culturally, it was just too far away from me, and I felt like no matter how hard I tried, I wasn't ever going to get it. Tolstoy's not that way. If you try to get it, you can get it. Another thing about Russia that makes it pretty fascinating is its geographic and ethnographic diversity. Russia is now the world's largest country. I believe it was in Tolstoy's day too. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I believe it was. There are the workaday Russians. There are also Muslims who live in Russia, fairly large Muslim communities. There are Buddhists who live in Russia. There are a variety of native peoples who, as in all places, haven't all been quite wiped out yet, so they're still hanging on, often in the more remote parts of Russia. One of the most important differences between Russia and America is that where America had slavery, Russia had serfdom. Now, serfdom was much like slavery, and yet it was not quite the same thing. The serfs were bound to the land, and so whatever noble owned that land was in charge of those serfs. He didn't actually own them as property, but he reaped the benefits of their labor. Serfs are also not slaves in one very important detail. That is that the Russian people viewed the serf as kind of the Russian, or the most fundamental of all Russian types. I don't think that in 1850, say, in America, Americans of any stripe viewed slaves as the American, or the most fundamental type of American. Maybe they should have. The more wealthy serfs, the ones who had been able to buy their own land and actually hire other peasants to work for them, these were the kulaks. Then, later, after Tolstoy's day, there was the dekulakization, when they were liquidated, shall we say, after the revolution. Above them, there are bureaucrats and middle-ranking officers in the military. Then, of course, at the very top, there is the aristocracy, with the Tsar at the very, very peak, the very, very pinnacle of Russian society. Curiously, in Tolstoy's day, the nobility did not speak Russian but French. And yes, you will see, indeed, if you read Anna Karenina. Again, just doing everything I can to try to convince people to read this book. You may be thinking to yourself, is Tolstoy boring? Well, I thought so. And I tried to read Tolstoy a number of times through my life, and I always failed. And there were a number of reasons for that. One of the reasons is that what is great about Tolstoy, Tolstoy's greatness, is not as immediately apparent as a writer like, say, Shakespeare, who gives you lots of fireworks right from the very beginning, and, tons of jokes and fast, interesting plots and stuff like that. Tolstoy is more slow. He's more quiet. It requires a bit more out of you as a reader to stay engaged, and you've got to stick with it for those first couple hundred pages, because it's only then that all the pieces start kind of connecting and all moving together in a very particular way. You've got to get to that, or you won't be able to understand what this is. It's also interesting to think sometimes about how present or absent a writer is, or seems to be, in their own writing. Tolstoy is very hard to find on the page. He always stays way, way in the background, except rarely, when he just kind of pops up and gives this little nugget of wisdom. These things that seem so profoundly true that it's as if you've already known them, only you didn't realize it. When I'm reading Tolstoy, sometimes it seems as though it wasn't even written by a person, if that makes any sense. Sometimes they seem like books that were just found in a cave somewhere. The upshot of all this, as I see it at least, is that the characters are painted in very stark relief, and they seem very alive because Tolstoy is so subtle in terms of his own presence within the narrative. Again, this is a very long, very complicated, very great book. I can't really give you a plot summary or even go through all of the characters. It's a very, very large cast of characters, many of whom are pretty memorable. I did want to mention 5. There's Anna Karenina herself, her husband, Alexei Alexandrovich Karenin, and last of all, Count Vronsky. He's the third point in the love triangle, as it were. Everybody knows that Anna Karenina is a tragedy, but what some people may not know is there's also a depiction of a happy couple in the book. Their names are Kitty and Levin, and they're given almost as much attention as Anna Karenina is. Of course, it's called Anna Karenina, and that's not called Kitty and Levin, but still. I did just want to make the point, there is a happy couple in this book, and it's not just all gloom and doom. Again, rather than me giving you my opinion about this classic, I think I'm just going to read some. I wanted to provide a brief note on the translation. You're going to notice I'm not reading out of this book. This is just a representative copy. The translation you want is the original one by Constance Garnett. This one is by Richard Pevere and Larisa Volokonsky. And it's not very good. This was a gift that I just happened to have. The one you want is the original by Constance Garnett. She's criticized for flattening a lot of the Russian writer's style. I actually don't think that's true. I've tried to read this book in a couple different translations, and that one is still the best. So that's the one you should get. This novel starts famously with the following sentence. Happy families are all alike, but every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. It's an interesting first sentence. One of the things you can do with it is just kind of divide both sides of the equation by family. And you can say, happy people are all alike, but every unhappy person is unhappy in his own way, his or her way, I guess. I mean, think about a plane ride. You're going along fine, nothing's really happening. Everybody's going to be doing about the same thing. They're going to be goofing off on their phones, or maybe they're asleep or whatever. Maybe they're doing different things, but it doesn't matter what they're doing. Now, imagine all of a sudden the same plane begins to crash, and the oxygen masks come down, and these people think, well, hey, this is it. I might die. What you're going to see is that the people on that plane are going to react to that news in very, very different ways. Some of them are going to start to cry, and others may start to pray. Others may just kind of get quiet. But they will, when they are put under that pressure, they're going to react in meaningfully different, interestingly different ways. Now I'm going to read some of my favorite parts from this book. This is a description of Seryoza, Anna Karenina's son, after she abandons him. Among Seryoza's favorite occupations was searching for his mother during his walks. He did not believe in death generally, and in her death in particular, in spite of what Lydia Ivanovna had told him and his father confirmed. And it was just because of that, and after he had been told she was dead, that he had begun looking for her out for such a walk. All her face would be visible, she would smile, she would hug him. He would sniff her fragrance, feel the softness of her arms, and cry with happiness, just as he had one evening laying on her lap while she tickled him, and he laughed and bit her white ring-covered fingers. Later, when he accidentally learned from his old nurse that his mother was not dead, and his father and Lydia Ivanovna had explained to him that she was dead to him because she was wicked, which he could not possibly believe because he loved her, he went on seeking her and expecting her in the same way. That day in the public gardens, there had been a lady in a lilac veil, whom he had watched with a throbbing heart, believing it to be she as she came towards them along the path. The lady had not come up to them, but had disappeared somewhere. That day, more intensely than ever, Seryozha felt a rush of love for her, and now, waiting for his father, he forgot everything, and cut all round the edge of the table with his penknife, staring straight before him with sparkling eyes and dreaming of her. Sad indeed, isn't it? This is a bit describing Kitty and Levin's wedding. I had somebody read this at my own wedding, because I liked it so much. Then relations arrived, and there began that state of blissful absurdity from which Levin did not emerge till the day after his wedding. Levin was in a continual state of awkwardness and discomfort, but the intensity of his happiness went on all the while increasing. He felt continually that a great deal was being expected of him. What he did not know, and he did everything he was told, and it all gave him happiness. He had thought his engagement would have nothing about it like others, that the ordinary conditions of engaged couples would spoil his special happiness. But it ended in his doing exactly as other people did, and his happiness being only increased thereby and becoming more and more special, more and more unlike anything that had ever happened. This is near the end. This is the part where she throws herself under the train. I'm sorry to spoil the ending for you if you hadn't heard that yet, but that's what happens. If you've ever been depressed before in your life, this passage may well ring true for you. This is what it's like if it's never happened to you. A bell rang. Some young men, ugly and impudent, and at the same time very careful of the impression they were making, hurried by. Pyotr, too, crossed the room in his livery and top boots with his dull animal face, and came up to her to take her to the train. Some noisy men were quiet as she passed them on the platform, and one whispered something about her to another, something vile, no doubt. She stepped up on the high step and sat down in a carriage by herself on a dirty seat that had once been white. Her bag lay beside her, shaken up and down by the springiness of the seat. With a foolish smile, Pyotr raised his hat with its colored band at the window in token of farewell. An impudent conductor slammed the door and the latch. A grotesque-looking lady wearing a bustle. Anna mentally undressed the woman and was appalled at her hideousness, and a little girl, laughing affectedly, ran down the platform. Katerina Andreevna, she's got them all. Ma Tanza, cried the little girl. Even the child's hideous and affected, thought Anna. To avoid seeing anyone, she got up quickly and seated herself at the opposite window of the empty carriage. A misshapen-looking peasant covered with dirt and a cap from which his tangled hair stuck out all round passed by that window, stooping down to the carriage wheels. There's something familiar about that hideous peasant, thought Anna, and remembering her dream, she moved away to the opposite door, shaking with terror. The conductor opened the door and let in a man and his wife. It goes on a bit like this and more. We'll skip to the very end. I love the part where it says Anna mentally undressed her and found her hideous. That is what it's like when you've gotten into that kind of place. You can only see the worst in everyone, and it's all you can think about all the time. Okay, skipping ahead a bit, here's the big moment. She tried to fling herself below the wheels of the first carriage as it reached her, but the red bag which she tried to drop out of her hand delayed her, and she was too late. She missed the moment. She had to wait for the next carriage. A feeling such as she had known when about to take the first plunge into bathing came upon her, and she crossed herself. That familiar gesture brought back into her soul a whole series of girlish and childish memories, and suddenly the darkness that had covered everything for her was torn apart, and life rose up before her for an instant with all its bright past joys. But she did not take her eyes from the wheels of the second carriage, and exactly at the moment when the space between the wheels came opposite her, she dropped the red bag, and drawing her hand back into her shoulders, fell on her hands under the carriage, and lightly, as though she would rise again at once, dropped onto her knees. At the same instant, she was terror-stricken in what she was doing. Where am I? What am I doing? What for? She tried to get up, to drop backwards, but something huge and merciless struck her on the head and rolled her on her back. Lord, forgive me all, she said, feeling it impossible to struggle. A peasant muttering something was working at the iron above her, and the light by which she had read the book filled with troubles, falsehood, sorrow, and evil flared up more brightly than ever before, lighted up for her all that had been in darkness, flickered, began to grow dim, and was quenched forever. And, that's it for Anna Karenina. So, we'll be back next week with the complete works of H.P. Lovecraft.